Hello to you, Minister. Thanks for joining us. PM yesterday arguing for a two-state solution, saying that is a reality as far as Israel-Palestine is concerned. When?
Well, Kay, it's been the UK's aim all along. In fact, the UK drafted the original resolution in the UN that said that that should be the outcome. There's no escaping that after the last decade or so, that has not been as vigorously pursued by the international community as it had been in previous decades. But it's good to hear the Prime Minister championing the cause of a two-state solution once again.
Meanwhile, demonstrations continuing on UK streets, as we saw at the weekend. We're hearing the government is considering toughening laws on protest. What would that look like?
Well, my understanding is that those stories that are covered in the papers are the consequence of a leak, and as such, I don't know the detail. Suffice to say, however, Kay, that there are two elements of the way that the law is applied in circumstances such as we've seen over the weekend. The first is in the way that the police those events, and that is a matter for the police. They are operationally independent. But also, of course, the government needs to reflect on whether the law of the day is sufficient to meet the complexity or the circumstances of various protests. And so I think it's entirely right that the government would be looking at whether or not there are things that need to be done legislatively in order to give the police greater powers to police those protests better.
Like what?
Well, like I said, you've seen some speculation in the papers, but I believe that that's the consequence of the leak, and I'm not going to comment directly on those proposals. But you asked me whether or not it was right that the government should be looking at changes in the law, and I agree with you that it is right, that that's the sort of appropriate thing to do if it looks like protests are happening again and again and again, and that people are turning up each week carrying placards and shouting chants that are hateful. Clearly, the law needs to be strengthened to avoid that.
Met Police say the Home Secretary contributed to the tensions at the weekend. Do you agree?
I wouldn't have used the language that she used in her op-ed, but it is also inescapably true that Tommy Robinson and his EDL thugs were organising their protests well before the Home Secretary published her article.
But do you acknowledge what the Metropolitan Police are saying, that her comments contributed to the tensions?
Look, I think that there has been too much second-guessing of the Metropolitan Police by politicians on the media. The Metropolitan Police have put out the statement that they put out, and that's entirely in their gift.
Does the Home Secretary have to accept blame that Tommy Robinson and his people, as you described them,
Well, I said thugs. I said thugs, Kay.
You did. That's what I alluded to. Have to accept the blame for those people that we can see here feeling that they could go out there and behave in the way that they did at the weekend?
No, there's plenty of debate about whether or not she should have used the language that she used, and as I said, I wouldn't have done so. But Tommy Robinson and the EDL were planning their demonstration before her op-ed were published, and Tommy Robinson and those that follow him have their way of doing business, and it is deplorable. And as a veteran, I find it even more deplorable that their stated purpose was somehow to assist me and my fellow veterans in being able to observe the Armistice safely. They did the complete opposite. In fact, they provided disruption and noise that eroded the importance and the peacefulness of the moment.
As a veteran, perhaps I can ask you about the latest situation in Gaza and the fact that we're being told by the authorities there that babies are dying. Children, 1 every 10 minutes, we're told by the authorities, are dying. And one particular hospital where many thousands of people are sheltering in place has now run out of fuel. What can we do to help them?
Well, look, I think we have to continue to remind the Israelis of their responsibilities under international humanitarian law. I think we have to continue to push the need for humanitarian pauses so that aid can flow in and those that need to be evacuated can be evacuated. And the UK, alongside our allies, are making that case. But what we should not do is call for an outright ceasefire. It is entirely legitimate that Israel seeks, in the wake of what happened 4 Saturdays ago, to destroy Hamas. If they don't, then what happened 4 Saturdays ago will happen again. And moreover, the Palestinian people living in Gaza will continue to be subjugated by the way that Hamas does its business as a government. So we have to make that distinction, make the case for humanitarian pauses so that aid can flow in and desperate people can be evacuated, whilst also supporting Israel's right to prosecute the military campaign in Gaza to destroy the tunnels, destroy the bunkers, take out the infrastructure that Hamas uses to wage its war of terror. And both of those things can be achieved alongside each other.
Are you content that Israel is acting within international law?
Look, it's difficult to provide a running commentary when you haven't got the targeting information available to you. But it is the case that the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, allow for proportionate and necessary military action. And where there are protected sites, such as hospitals, schools, places of worship, if an adversary uses those deliberately in order to hide its military infrastructure within, then they do become legitimate military targets. Now, the IDF are very clear that they are not launching attacks onto hospitals at the moment. Kay, the reality of these situations is dire. And what you have to remember is, and it is possible to be sympathetic to the Israeli cause, sympathetic to their justifiable need to destroy Hamas and protect their people. But you can also, in exactly the same breath, be sympathetic to the plight of innocent Palestinians who are caught underneath it all. That's why the UK is making the case for humanitarian pauses. It's why the Royal Air Force is flying humanitarian aid forward. It's why we're working with Egypt, Jordan, and other partners in the region to try to alleviate as much of the humanitarian suffering as we can, but still standing full square behind Israel and its right to prosecute the military campaign against Hamas.
Yeah, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, US Secretary of State, at the weekend, saying far too many Palestinians have died in Gaza and that much more needs to be done to protect them. You'd agree with him? Yeah,
look, I mean, the UK and the US are working very, very closely together, and you won't get a fag paper between our positions.
So too many Palestinians have died and more needs to be done to protect them?
Well, I've been through already the reality that it is the case that there is enormous humanitarian suffering and that the UK is committed to alleviating that as best we can. We're making the case for humanitarian pauses, as the United States is. We're flowing aid into the region through our partners, as the United States is. But we are also standing full square behind Israel's right to prosecute the military campaign, as the United States is.
OK, I'm going to try this question. God loves a trier. I know you're not going to answer me. Should Suella Braverman be sacked today?
That's a matter for the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister alone. There's plenty for all of us to be getting on with in our departments rather than worrying about speculation of a reshuffle.
OK, I won that bet with my producer. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Heappey. Most
Thanks, Kay. Good morning.